In a Marine Corps boot camp filled with shouting drill instructors, sand pits, sweat, and pride, an elderly man quietly stood near the edge of the obstacle course. His back was slightly bent, his hair white as salt, and his uniform, an outdated service jacket, hung loosely on his thin frame. The recruits didn't know him. They only saw an old man struggling just to step over a log. And when he tripped, falling to one knee, gripping the dirt as he tried to stand, the laughter erupted so loudly that even the drill instructors paused. They mocked his stumbling, his shaky legs, his fake uniform, and his slow breathing, but what none of them knew was that before the sun set, this same old man would run their entire obstacle course blindfolded perfectly, flawlessly. And someone very high-ranking would expose exactly who he really was. Keep listening. And which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more. The day started like any other training morning. Recruits were sprinting between stations, dragging sandbags, scaling walls, and doing push-ups until their elbows bled dust. In the middle of all this chaos, the old man wandered too close to the rope climb. One of the recruits, tall, muscular, and full of cocky bravado, pointed at him and barked, "Hey, Grandpa, you lost! The retirement home is 2 miles south." His buddies laughed. Another added, "Look at that jacket. Bro thinks he served in World War Zero." The old man didn't respond. He simply placed a trembling hand on the wooden beam beside him and tried to catch his breath. There was a small tremor in his fingers, one the recruits took as weakness, but was actually something else entirely. Calmness, discipline, the steady control of a man who had faced true terror and never flinched. A corporal jogged over, waving the group off. "Knock it off! Let him pass!" Maintenance crew probably sent him. But the recruits weren't done. They loved an easy target, especially one that couldn't fight back. "You sure you don't want to try the course, old-timer?" One of them mocked. "We'll spot you, or maybe call medevac when your bones snap." The laughter grew. The old man lifted his eyes slowly, deliberately, and for the first time looked directly at them. His voice, when it came, was soft, steady, almost too calm for the chaos around him. "I've run this course," he said quietly, "more times than you've brushed your teeth." The recruits froze, then erupted into louder laughter. "This course wasn't even built when you were alive. Bro thinks he's Captain America. Hey, old man, do it blindfolded too while you're at it." The old man tilted his head. "If that's what you want," he said. A silence fell, not because they respected him, but because they assumed he was joking. No one noticed the drill instructor standing behind them, arms folded, watching this unfold with a strange expression. No one noticed the Marines from the operations tower staring out the window. No one noticed the lieutenant colonel crossing the parade deck toward them. Only one person knew the truth. The aging veteran standing in the dust, loosening his breathing, rolling his shoulders as if waking a part of himself that had been dormant for years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a black cloth, a blindfold, and the entire obstacle course suddenly felt smaller around him. The moment the old man lifted the blindfold, the recruits stopped laughing, not because they respected him, but because they couldn't tell whether he was serious or simply insane. The Marine Corps obstacle course stretched long and brutal across the grounds, tall walls, rope climbs, mud pits, balance logs, tunnels, chains, monkey bars, and the final grueling sprint through soft sand. Even fully conditioned recruits failed it daily. And here stood an elderly stranger with shaking hands, preparing to attempt it blindfolded. The stakes became clear instantly. If he failed, he'd be humiliated and potentially injured. If the recruits interfered or escalated things, they could face disciplinary action. But more importantly, if the old man succeeded, even partially, it would disgrace every recruit who had mocked him. The corporal sensed this and stepped forward, palms out. "You don't need to do this," he said, lowering his voice as if speaking to someone fragile. "These kids are just running their mouths." But the old man didn't acknowledge him. He tied the cloth behind his head with careful precision, like a man tightening a ritual he had performed 1,000 times. His demeanor changed, not dramatically, not theatrically, but subtly, like a soldier slipping back into an old skin. His posture straightened. His breathing slowed. The tremor in his fingers stopped completely. It unsettled the corporal enough that he whispered, "Something S off," but none of the recruits heard him. They were too busy whispering among themselves, mocking the challenge they believed they were about to witness. "He's gonna fall on the first log. No way he even finds the rope wall. Get ready to catch him when he breaks a hip." Their arrogance drowned out the sound of footsteps approaching from the other side of the training field, footsteps belonging to a lieutenant colonel and a gunnery sergeant, both on their morning inspection route. They noticed the circle forming around the old man. They noticed the recruits acting rowdy, but instead of intervening, they paused from a distance, curious. The lieutenant colonel shaded his eyes. "Who's that?" The gunnery sergeant took one look, froze, and whispered, "Sir, I think that's—" But before he said the name, the old man took his first step. The recruit snickered as he lifted his foot and tapped the ground ahead of him. But the corporal went rigid. That step, it wasn't random. It was measured, feeling for elevation, testing for traction. Every movement was too precise to belong to someone wandering blindly. He took another step, then another. His boot landed exactly at the edge of the first log. His hand reached forward, not searching, but finding the correct grip point. No hesitation, no misplacement, no fear. The corporal whispered, "He knows every inch of this place." The recruits didn't hear him. They were forming a half circle, eager to watch him fail. "Come on, Grandpa," one shouted. "Show us that super soldier strength." But the old man didn't react. He reached up and placed his palm on the wooden beam, flat, confident, like someone who knew exactly how high it was without seeing it. And that was when the lieutenant colonel, still watching from afar, felt his stomach drop. Not because the old man was attempting the obstacle, but because the old man's stance, his foot placement, his breathing pattern, it all looked eerily familiar. "Gunny," the colonel said quietly, "I think that really is him." The gunnery sergeant nodded once gravely. "Yes, sir. And if those recruits pushed him into this," the colonel's jaw tightened, "then they're in trouble they can't even imagine." But none of the recruits noticed the ranking officers anymore. All eyes were on the old man as he lifted his chin, blindfold tight, body calm, standing at the beginning of a brutal course he somehow seemed to already know. The stakes were no longer just humiliation. There was something else building beneath the surface. Something the recruits didn't yet recognize, but the officers watching did. And it terrified them. The air around the obstacle course shifted the moment the old man placed both hands on the first beam. The recruits still smirked, still whispered, still nudged each other with childish anticipation, but something in their expressions began to falter as soon as he moved. Not climbed, not scrambled, moved. With shocking precision, he swung one leg up and over the log, landing silently on the other side like someone half his age. No wobble, no uncertainty. Just pure balance born from muscle memory older than any of them. A ripple went through the recruits. "Lucky step," one muttered. "Gravity helped him," another whispered, not sounding convinced by his own excuse. But the corporal saw it clearly. The old man hadn't guessed. He knew. Before anyone could process it, he approached the rope wall. A towering climb that even the fittest recruits dreaded. They expected him to feel around for the first knot, to struggle with coordination, to hesitate. Instead, he reached out and grabbed the rope at the exact correct height without searching. His fingers wrapped around the knot like magnets drawn to metal. Then he pulled, hard. The recruits gasped as his entire body lifted off the ground in one smooth motion. He climbed, not fast, but steady, efficient, controlled. With every pull, his boots found natural footholds as if the course had been built for him. Blindfolded, 80-something, unshaking. Halfway up, the old man paused, not from exhaustion, but from memory. His head tilted slightly like he could hear echoes from decades ago. Shouting, gunfire, the thump of helicopter rotors, mud not mulch, a cliffside not a rope wall, a team behind him relying on him, and just like that he resumed climbing faster. Below him the recruits' bravado drained like water through open fingers. This can't be real," one whispered. "He can't see anything. How is he doing that? This guy's either faking being old or faking being blindfolded." The corporal didn't join the chatter. His eyes were locked on the old man's posture, the straight spine, the triangle-shaped stance, the controlled rhythm of movement. Nothing about this resembled luck. It resembled training, and not the training recruits got, something older, rougher, learned in a time when obstacle courses weren't challenges, but survival drills. Meanwhile, the lieutenant colonel and gunnery sergeant had moved closer. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted a clear view. The colonel whispered, "Gunny, look at his hands." The gunnery sergeant nodded grimly. "Yeah, those scars aren't from age, sir." His palms, briefly visible during the climb, were a map of old burns and calluses, marks of rope descents, fast roping, and combat extractions long before safety gloves and modern gear existed. When he reached the top, the old man didn't pause to rest. He immediately swung his body over and lowered himself down the other side, hitting the ground with a perfectly controlled bend of the knees. A technique that prevented impact injuries. A technique taught only to specialized units. The recruits looked stunned now, whispering louder, more frantic. "Who is this guy? Why does he move like a scout sniper? No way he's a regular veteran, right?" But the rehook struck hardest not because of what he'd done, but what came next. He reached the balance logs, a narrow zigzag of wooden poles suspended above mud. Without hesitation, without sight, he stepped onto the first one and crossed it like it was a flat sidewalk. Every pivot, every shift of weight, every foot placement exactly correct. By now the recruits were silent. The corporal swallowed hard. The colonel and gunny exchanged a look of disbelief. And then something happened that rehooked every single person. The old man stopped again, lifted his chin, and pointed to the far end of the course, exactly where the final sprint began. Blindfolded, without sound, without guidance, he knew the layout. The colonel's breath caught. Gunny, only one man would know this course blind. The gunnery sergeant nodded. Yes, sir, and those kids have no idea whose ghost they awakened. The moment the old man stepped off the balance logs and approached the final stretch of the course, the atmosphere around the training field changed completely. Gone was the laughter, the smug grins, the whispered insults. In their place grew a thick, weighted silence, one made of disbelief, confusion, and most of all, fear. Not fear of the old man hurting them, but fear of what they were realizing about him, and about themselves. The old veteran stood still for a moment, the blindfold fluttering slightly in the breeze. His chest rose and fell in calm, steady breaths. Then, almost ceremonially, he reached up and pulled the blindfold free. His eyes, sharp, clear, unwavering, locked instantly onto the lieutenant colonel standing at the edge of the course. No squinting, no searching, as if he had known exactly where the colonel was the entire time. The recruit stumbled back. The corporal's jaw hung open. Even the gunnery sergeant took a half-step forward, stunned. But the lieutenant colonel, his reaction was different. He didn't move, didn't blink. His face went pale and his posture straightened so fast it looked involuntary, muscle memory from another lifetime snapping into place. It wasn't recognition, it was reverence. And then, without warning, the colonel took 2 decisive steps forward and raised his hand into a perfect, rigid salute. A salute he did not offer lightly. Salute he had never, ever given to a civilian. The recruits gasped. The corporal felt his stomach drop. The gunnery sergeant whispered under his breath, "No way, it can't be him." The old man didn't return the salute immediately. Instead, he walked slowly, methodically toward the colonel, the dust of the field swirling around his boots. Once he stood directly in front of him, the old veteran returned the salute, cleaner, sharper, more flawless than any recruit on that field could ever hope to achieve. The colonel lowered his hand first. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Sir, forgive me, I did not expect to ever see you on my field again." The recruits froze. "Sir?" He called the old man sir. The old veteran smiled faintly. "You redesigned the course," he said, his voice steady but warm, "but the bones are still the same." You ran this course before," one recruit dared to ask. The colonel answered for him. "Ran it!" He turned, staring down his soldiers, his voice gaining sharpness. "This man created it." A shockwave rippled through the recruits. The corporal felt his heart pounding against his ribs. The gunnery sergeant bowed his head, a deep gesture of respect. The colonel continued, his voice carrying across the entire field. "Before any of you were born, this man served in a unit that trained here in absolute secrecy, a unit that shaped the very principles of our modern combat training." He paused, swallowing hard. "This is the architect of the blindfold protocol, the course you all just failed to complete sighted while he mastered it blindfolded." The recruits turned as one toward the old man, eyes wide, all arrogance evaporated. One whispered, "He's a legend," another breathed, "We mocked him." The colonel nodded deeply toward the veteran. "We owe everything on this field to him, every obstacle, every movement, every doctrine you follow." The old man simply lifted a hand, silencing the colonel with a small, humble gesture. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," he said softly. "I came to remind you of something." He pointed to the obstacle course behind him. "Skill fades, speed fades, but discipline, respect, those are choices every day." The tension snapped not from fear, but from realization. The recruit stood straighter. The corporal's eyes stung with shame. The gunnery sergeant exhaled slowly, finally understanding who they had been dealing with. And then the twist hit hardest, because the colonel stepped aside, cleared his throat, and addressed the entire platoon. "Fall in," he commanded. "All of you, right now." The recruits scrambled into formation, hearts pounding. The colonel turned to the old man. "Sir, the field is yours." The old veteran stepped forward, and for the first time in decades, returned to the command position he was born for. The recruit stood frozen in tight formation, breath shallow, eyes locked on the old veteran now standing at the head of the field. The transformation was so complete, so instantaneous, that some of them wondered if they were looking at the same man who had been mocked only an hour earlier. Gone was the quiet, hunched figure sweeping the bleachers. Standing before them was someone different, someone who carried command in the way he stood, the way he breathed, the way his gaze swept the field with quiet authority. The lieutenant colonel stepped back respectfully, hands clasped behind his spine, signaling silently that the old veteran was now in charge. A privilege he rarely, if ever, granted. The recruits braced themselves as the old veteran looked them over, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a calm, penetrating understanding that made each man feel seen, deeply seen, in a way they had never experienced in training. Finally, he spoke. "You all think this field is built to test your strength," he began, his voice steady and low, but carrying effortlessly across the open space. "You think these walls and ropes and logs exist to break your bodies." He stepped forward, boots crunching against the dirt. "But this course was never meant to test your bodies. It was meant to test your judgment." The recruits stiffened, unsure if they were being scolded or taught. "You mocked a man you didn't know," he continued. "You judged someone based on a broom, on a uniform, on age. And that," he paused, letting the silence settle like dust over their shoulders, "means you judged a book by a cover you didn't even bother to read." The corporal swallowed hard. His face was burning red, not from embarrassment, but from the realization of how deeply he had failed the lesson. The old veteran continued walking, slow and deliberate, past each row of recruits. "If you cannot show respect here," he said, tapping the ground with his boot, "in the safety of training, then how can you be trusted when lives depend on you? When it's dark and loud and people are screaming your name, do you think rank or age will save you?" He stopped, turning to face them directly. "No, character saves you, respect saves you, brotherhood saves you." The recruit's eyes followed him like he was gravity itself. Even the gunnery sergeant, hardened by years in the field, kept his head slightly bowed, absorbing every word. The old man took a breath, his shoulders lifting with visible effort, perhaps due to age or perhaps to steady his emotions. "When I built this course," he said, softer now, "I built it for men who needed to survive. I built it for warriors fighting battles where no one was coming to rescue them." His gaze sharpened. "And the first lesson we taught back then was simple. Your attitude determines your fate." The colonel cleared his throat, stepping forward just enough to stand beside the old veteran but not overshadow him. "Recruits," he said, voice firm, "what you witnessed today was not a performance. It wasn't a trick. It was a reminder." He gestured respectfully toward the old man. "This man wrote the doctrine you train under. He trained the units you admire. He is the reason half the tactics in your manuals exist at all. And you," his voice dropped into a low, dangerous tone, "mocked him like he was nothing." The corporal couldn't hold it in anymore. He stepped forward and snapped into the stiffest salute of his life. "Sir," he said, voice trembling, "permission to apologize." The old veteran looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. The corporal lowered his salute, stepped closer, and bowed his head. "I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were." The old veteran placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Son," he replied, "the lesson isn't to respect me because of who I was. It's to respect others even when you do know who they are." One by one, the recruits followed the corporal's lead. Heads lowered, apologies whispered, respect restored. The tension dissolved not into guilt but into understanding, into unity. The old veteran took one more look at the field he had built. The wind tugged gently at his faded red shirt. And then, with a small nod to the colonel, he turned to walk away, but the colonel stopped him. "Sir," he said, voice thick with emotion, "would you honor us by saying the final words to today's training cycle?" The old veteran turned back, looked over the young faces, eager, humbled, reshaped, and said, "Train hard, fight smart, respect always. That's how you become the soldier the world hopes you'll be." As he walked off the training field, the recruits stood taller than they ever had, and for the first time all day, they understood why the colonel had frozen at his name.